أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه. Assalamu alaikum, my dear friends. It's good to be with you again. I want to share with you some of the findings of my investigation, my study, my reading of a very, very important chapter in the Holy Quran titled The Women. Commonly known as Surah An-Nisa. It's the chapter number 4 of the Holy Quran. And it's a difficult chapter in the sense that many critics of the Deen, many critics of the Quran, many opponents of the Quran, and I'm talking particularly contemporary opponents of the Quran, have used particular verses in this chapter of the Quran to launch a venomous and nasty assault on the Quran. I'll give you a few examples. Like, it is in this chapter that the so-called verse on beating women appears. So it's verse 34 in this chapter. Then it's also in this chapter that the mention of multiple wives or polygamy is mentioned. And it's also in this chapter that reference is made to so-called concubines. And it is in this chapter also that the uneven distribution of the will and testament appears. And so you can see I've already listed 4 of these contentious issues that are listed, and they come very, very, very early on in this chapter. So what I've done thus far is I have read from verse 1 to verse 50, and when I say I've read, let me explain. When I read the text, I seek the meaning in the text, and that is what I share on this this YouTube channel. And let me just quickly repeat or remind you of the process I use in arriving at an understanding of the words. Now, yes, I know the traditional way is to simply take one of the tafsirs, Qurtubi, Kathir, Jalalain, Tabari, any of these existing explanations of the wording of the Quran, is just to resort to them. And that is what 99.9, if not 100%, of the students of Islam at seminaries, at religious colleges and institutions, that's what they do. They don't really read the Quran and contemplate or tadabbur or reflect on the words. No, what they do is they take a verse and they read it alongside the existing tafsir. So these tafsirs are all, 1,000 years or 800 years old. And so what you do is you don't, the traditional or the main understanding within the Muslim world today, or within scholarship, within traditional schools, is that we don't read the Quran to understand it. We read the Quran with the tafsirs, or the existing explanations, these traditional explanations. And of course, what I do is what my generation is, a generation of us now, it's not just me, they are alhamdulillah, with all praise and glory to the Almighty, there are probably tens of us now that are re-looking at the text and that are putting the tafsirs aside, and that are saying, those of us who are doing it, that are saying, let us look at the Quran afresh, without the perspective, not through the lenses or not through the perspective of these 9th century, 12th century, 13th century students of the Quran. And one of our core principles is that there are no perfect authorities on the Quran. There are authorities on the Arabic language, on linguistics, on maybe on tradition, on history, yes, But on the Quran, there is no real authority on the meaning of the Quran. And the Quran only requires a working usage or command of the Arabic language, and also a decent general knowledge of the world. And the more general knowledge and the more understanding you have of the real world, my position is that the better insight you will have into the text. So let me not make a long story of this. I remind you quickly of the methodology I use, which is not using those traditional tafsirs. Well, they do feature, but not as a primary support or resource for me. So my first resource would be the Quran itself. So I would go into the Quran and seek the use of a particular word or a particular term, and try and use the modern software at our disposal to seek the occurrence of that term. So for example, we have made amazing discoveries on the word salah, because if you really analyze the 100 occurrences of the word salah, then you cannot but come to the conclusion that it is not a ritual kata or a practice, a sequence of postures only. Could be that, but it's definitely not only that. And it is far more than that. So the ritual sequence or the kata or the set of postures is a small percentage, is 5% of what salah really means. So that is what we've come to at this point in time. But the other method I use is where I am not able to do a decent inference or understanding of a particular term, then I would look at historical Arabic texts. So that could be any historical texts. It includes hadith books that are historical texts. It would include pre-Islamic texts even, if they do exist, if I have access to them. And I would then try and seek a very old and traditional meaning of that term. Then, after that, I would look at the various tafsirs and existing explanations. So then I would look at tafsir of Zamakhshari or at even modern day explanations. In fact, English translations. I would look at Muhammad Asad, to which I add a great deal of value. I would look at contemporary people who have worked on the Quran, Sam Gerrans, the monotheist translation, any translation that is in existence, I would look at their interpretation. If I'm stumped, if I'm unable to find a meaningful explanation of the verse, I would look at them and see if they've maybe gone and developed a proper understanding. And the aim of the exercise is to make the Quran meaningful and to make the Quran coherent and to make the Quran understandable. Okay, so, but there are other resources that I also rely on. I'm going to just end off with those, maybe one or two things. The one is my own understanding of science and of the world. So I believe that the Quran does link truth and the belief in Allah, or the affirmation of what is true and real, to what we can empirically observe. And so my own empirical observation, or what has been established by science or by scholarship empirically and rationally, I do seek corroboration with the meaning in terms of existing science and understanding. So for example, and this is where I depart from the people who hold to the idea that the earth is basically, in terms of shape, a flat disk. Look, and I'm not writing off the guys who believe in the flat disk. All I'm saying is that maybe we live on a three-dimensional flat plane if we consider the world to be four-dimensional. Just think about that. If we consider the world or the universe or time-space to be four-dimensional, in terms of time being also a dimension, then we do live on a three-dimensional flat surface. But I'm going to focus or place my reading of the Quran within existing, established, empirical findings and rational findings within the community of scholarship. And I draw no distinction between religious scholarship and scientific scholarship and historical scholarship. Scholarship is scholarship. And we are a people who are people of, we bring together, we unite the sciences, we unite the perspective on the universe, right? So I would always try to make the reading of the verse coherent with established understanding and scholarship. Of course, it's not always going to happen. Scholarship is not always correct. I concede that. For example, gravity, we used to think gravity was a force. Isaac Newton's approach to gravity was that it is a force that operates over a huge distance, over light years, or not light years, over millions of kilometers. But Einstein came and explained that gravity is actually not a force, but it is the curvature of time-space. And I bring it back to the flat earth idea that some people have, and that Sam Kieran's advances, which unfortunately I don't quite see the way they see it. Right, so those are the methods I use in understanding the Quran. Finally, there's one final resource that I use, and that is my own life experience. Now, I bring to my reading of the Quran, I bring the heart, the mind, the experience of me, of Anwar, and that experience covers a lot of different roles as a man in the year 2022. I am a man who have family, children, loved ones, some enemies, a history of maybe involvement in battles and fights and struggles, financial challenges like any other man, difficulties, issues with family maybe, with close ones, disputes, even maybe here and there some unhappiness or dispute within my own home. I bring all of those to my reading of the Quran. And when I read about the relationship between husband and wife, I cannot but relate it back to my own relationship between husband, my own relationship with my wife. I don't have experience of 2 wives or 3 wives, but I do have family members and friends and colleagues who have chosen the option or gone for 3 wives, 2 wives, sorry. So I do come to the reading of the Quran from my own perspective. And inshallah, the idea that the intention with this project is to bring all of those to bear on the Quran and to arrive at a meaning and to explain the verses to you. Now this is going to be a fairly long video, so if you'd like to discontinue and continue on at another time, that's completely up to you. But before I get to the verses, I want to get to the verses, but I need to finish off a few preliminaries. Okay, going back to the detractors, the haters, the opponents, those who belie or repudiate the Quran, who write it off as a work of the devil at worst and maybe at best as the imagination of the Prophet Muhammad. Let's quickly just look at them. I've got a word to say on that. You see, we have countless narratives and understandings and stories that confront us every day. You see, we have science, we have the rising, we have the sun, the role that the sun plays, we have the Bible, we have woke ideology or thinking, we have feminism, we have the official government narrative, about government is good for you. Every narrative, every story, every pitch, every approach to your intellect, any invitation for you to accept a particular narrative, whether it is science, politics, religion, Christianity, Judaism, liberalism, ultra-liberalism, you can, as a mind, as a person who processes the information, you can develop a particular orientation towards it. You can develop a orientation of repulsion or aversion, or you can develop a orientation of susceptibility and openness. Now, let me give you an example. I'm going to take a biological example. There's now they have the ability of transplanting a hand. I don't know if you're aware of it. It's been done successfully. So they can actually transplant where your hand is no longer functional, or where you've lost a hand. I think a foot also. They are able to now transplant another person's donor hand onto your body to replace your hand with a completely different hand, and you could actually function perfectly with a new hand. The problem is that the body often repels the new hand. So the hand will work, and then the hand will stop working because there's something in the body that just develops a biological, physiological rejection of that hand. And it's very difficult to explain, but the body rejects it, and then the hand will just become withered, sick, blue, and will just completely, you will lose that new hand. But in some cases, here's the point. In some cases, they are actually able to, the body will accept that hand, that new hand. But psychologically, when you look at that hand, you will not be able to ever associate or identify with that hand. You will not see the fingers that you grew up with, the hairs and the unique features on your hand. You will not see it, let's say, for example, both hands. And you will develop a psychological rejection of that hand. And they will have to amputate the hand because you will become psychologically troubled by the hand. And it will cause you to physically and physiologically develop a problem with that hand. And I want to use this now as an analogy when it comes to your orientation to accepting a new narrative. Now we come to those people who reject the Quran, who hate the Quran, who have an aversion for the Quran. You see, no matter what the Quran said, those same people are prepared to assimilate and accept the Bible, that speaks about killing and about concubines and about, Joseph had, 1,000 concubines. They will be able to assimilate, identify with those narratives, or with woke, ideology that or transgenderism, where they will promote, the gender change of 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, in other words, to physiologically go and change girls to boys, but they will reject the ideas that come in the Quran. In other words, their aversion is not based on any rational argument or rejection. It is simply an internal orientation of rejection and aversion. They are not susceptible to the Quran. And that is the problem we have. Before I go and read these words, you see, no matter how much we interpret and read and put down the meaning of the Quran, they will never accept it because they have a natural inbuilt aversion to the truth. And before they can ever have any acceptance of the words of Allah, of the book of the Quran, they need to first deal with their internal psychological and spiritual aversion to what is true. And the Quran, in fact, says that, you know, Allah will misguide many with this book and also guide many with this book. When will Allah misguide people with this book? Is when they come to the book with preconceived notions, with a prejudice against the book, with a level of skepticism that is beyond healthy skepticism. Because we have skepticism that is unhealthy and you have skepticism that is healthy. You see, when skepticism becomes unhealthy, it is at the point where you refuse to accept the evidence and where you invent objections to the evidence. And so my point that I want to make before we go into these verses is that we need to develop an attitude of receptiveness to the Quran. We need to surrender to the Quran, you see. And when you surrender to the book, you need to read the verses and be comforted by the idea that the book will not be unjust, it will not teach any injustice, it will not teach anything that denies or defies your rational state of mind or state of being, that the book will come and comfortably sit with you as a rational, as an extension of your rational, of your just, of your sane being, as you as a sane, rational human being. And the book will comfortably sit there. It will not come as a violence against your rational disposition, a violence against your sense of justice and beauty and kindness. It will not do violence. It will not obliterate that within you. It will augment, it will secure you, it will comfort you within your state of rational comfort that you are existing in. And I say this to you as an atheist, you as a Christian, you as a nominal Muslim, you as a Sunni, Shia, whatever Muslim is. Take the Quran, and the reading of the Quran must be in order to enhance our rational and our mental and our psychological and our spiritual balance. That equilibrium that we seek will be enhanced by the Quran. And that, my brothers and sisters, is an introduction to the reading I want to go to now. So let us move to that. Okay, enough of an introduction. Let me move to the verses itself. Now there are 50 verses that I've worked on, that I've labored and toiled, as I've explained, using the process, and that I'm presenting you with an understanding as I see it. Now, as I said in the introduction also, that there will be some contentious verses in this chapter, and they appear right up front in the first 50 verses, and the chapter is long, so I've got a lot of work to do still. This chapter goes on to I think 180 verses, but you know, up to verse 50 there's already a number of contentious verses. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the meaning that is beautiful, that is comforting, that is true to the text, that is not imposed on the text, that is not, as some people say, beaten or bludgeoned onto the text. I will share with you a beautiful meaning, but there will be here and there a meaning that I will have to give you some solid background to. So this is going to be quite lengthy, but bear with me. Now, I'm not going to go in detail through every verse. I will. There might be some verses that will simply require a a brushing over. Right. So let's quickly look at the first. I'm just going to read the first verse at least. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya ayyuha an-nas ittaqu rabbakum alladhi khalaqakum min nafsin wahidatin wa khalaqa minha zawjaha wa batha minhuma rijalan kathira wa nisaa. واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. The introduction to the chapter is very, very beautifully laid out in this first verse, where God explains that the origin of humanity, of mankind, starts with a single forefather, a single ancestor, and the ancestor augmented by a partner, so in other words a second human being, give rise to a offspring, and they multiply and they arrive at what we have today, 7 billion human beings. And the chapter, in fact, a very, very important or touching point in this first verse is that ittaqillah, it says, wattaqullah walladhina tasa'alu wal arham. Wattaqullah alladhi tasa'aluna bihi wal arham. So the first verse of this chapter states that have reverence, acknowledge God, but also acknowledge the arham. Now the arham is the mothers, right? The wombs. The word woman comes from the womb man, the man with womb. And as I said in other videos, we should celebrate the womb man, the man endowed with a womb, who is the woman, without which there is no mankind, there is no humanity. And we reject the idea of the feminist that there are no women, because denying women is denying mankind itself. And what the Quran actually does here in this verse is it does an amazing recognition of the womb man, of the woman, and says that this woman should be celebrated. You know, if they are, and not woman as woman, but woman as the bearer of the child, as the multiplier, as the one that that will bear offspring. Right. So, if we are 7 billion people in the world, we have 7 billion children that were born by a woman, not by a man. So there's no man that ever gave birth. Right. So, beautiful introduction, giving credit, giving acknowledgement to the women, and it is a fitting introduction because the chapter is titled An-Nisa, and that's what's going to be the theme. So I'm not going to go into detail. Let me tell you what is coming up now after this verse. What follows this verse? Right. So this verse now is going to dwell into the position of the outcasts, the margin, those on the margin in society. Remember, the Quran does not come to tell you how to go about doing the normal things. So the Quran doesn't tell you to eat every day to sustain yourself, but it will tell you what to avoid when you do eat. Right? So the same with society. The Quran is not going to dwell endlessly on regular relationships and men and women. It will go to the contentious areas. And in the contentious area, as far as women are concerned, is the existence of orphans, of children, and I'm going to explain the word orphan here. Yatim, a yatim in Arabic is not an orphan as we understand it in the Western sense, or in the English language. In Arabic, the word yatim, if you consult the historical texts, refer to a fatherless child. In other words, a defenseless child, a child that has lost identity of the tribe, identity of the father, because the father is really the one that gives security and most of all an identity. And a child without a father in traditional Arabic and in modern times is often what we call single parent child. But a single parent child is euphemism even in the West for a child with a mother only, where the father's gone missing or AWOL. So the first part of Surah An-Nisa does not deal with women only as women. It deals with women as members of that group of defenseless citizens, the children who have lost their protection of a man or husband. And that's a big problem. It's a problem in our times also. You know, I work in the field of education of small children. And I know what a big problem single parent homes present to society. First of all, those children do not perform and excel at the same level as children with two parents or with a mom and a dad in the house. Children who are the products of broken marriages or in single parent homes do suffer a disadvantage, a serious disadvantage when it comes to the overall development of those children. And it is only, I would say that it is only expected, that's the word, that the Quran will highlight the problem of single parent homes, or more particularly the Quran speaks about fatherless children. And I've used the translation, the defenseless children, because now I'm going to include in that children of fathers who have gone off to work in the terrible circumstances that we find ourselves in, where you have migrant labor, you have fathers that have to leave their homes, you have fathers that are victims of drug abuse and crime, incarceration. In the United States, we know that the prison population numbers approximately, what is it now? I'm subject to correction, it's more than 1 million. I think 4 million, I'm not sure, but there'll be a comment section. These are 90% males, and they are males that have been taken out of homes. These are males, often, many times, fathers whose children are now unfatherless. And so the first part of this chapter deals with the problem of defenseless children. It's a massive problem. I'm aware of the problem. I experienced the problem. And let's see what the Quran says. It says here, you know, there is property, perhaps, in the hands of those children. Hand all property of defenseless children back to them. Do not swap their good assets for your bad assets. Do not also consume their property by mixing it with your own. This all constitutes an outrageous crime. So the first point that the Quran makes is that the property, the wealth, the possessions of those who are defenseless, the children particularly in this verse, these are all sacred, untouchable by whoever takes responsibility for these unprotected or defenseless children. Goes on to say, if you fear, now this is, here we immediately jump into some contentious material now. If you fear that you will not do right by the defenseless children, these children with single mothers, then rather marry the women accompanying these children, whom you feel attracted to, 2, 3, or 4. But if you worry that you are unable to fairly manage multiple women, then marry only one, or marry those women already under your stewardship. That is preferred if you are to avoid iniquity. Let's just quickly stand still here. Now this verse says a lot. speaks about the defenseless children, children of single mothers, the children that are fostered by other aunts and grannies. That we have plenty of here also in my society. Grannies bringing up grandchildren. Okay, so what the Quran says is that instead of being a donor, instead of being a distant funder or a financial contributor to these children, the Quran actually promotes forming a family where these children could be part of a family. And so it allows for a marriage relationship. And this is where polygyny or multiple wives is actually introduced in the Quran. It's the only verse I think that people can really refer to. There might be others also, I think. Surah, Ahzab, or I'm not sure now. But in this verse, the idea that these children could become part of a family where a father could split himself between 3 or 4 homes is raised. That spectre is raised, and it is declared legitimate. Well, there could be reasons for it. First of all, rather marry these you feel attracted to. So it does say those that you feel attracted to. Ma taba lakum min An-Nisa. So it is not just, you don't have to marry these women for the sake of just marrying them. It is if there's a spark between you, if the two of you feel attracted. And I have seen that. I have seen that. The Quran is not talking pie in the sky here. There are many women who have children, one child, who are single, for whatever reason, a husband that is in jail, a husband that is lost to drug abuse, we'll call it mental illness for now, a husband that has been killed in war or in violence or in crime, a husband that has died, because of health issues. If there is love between you and them, the Quran allows it, right? If there's an attraction between, the Quran allows it. And is there anything absurd or ridiculous about this verse? I think if you place it within the context that I've sketched to you, then one father is very capable of sharing himself between up to 4 households, where he could effectively be a real father to many more children than one household, right? So we'll come later to the idea of who's really the custodian of the home, and that comes out also here. Let's continue to verse 4. And the women their bridal dowry with a good heart, should they willingly give back a portion of it and happily make use of it with a clear conscience. So in other words, what the Quran really brings up here is that, you see, the idea that is raised here, or the concept that is introduced in this verse, is that there is such a thing as financial security in return for companionship and female companionship and intimacy. Because I think the creator of the universe, the one who knows our most intimate nature, knows that the most aspired or sought after commodity or experienced by the male species of the race, of the human race, is intimacy and the warm companionship of a woman. I don't think, if you're a man, I'm a man, and I know the importance of seeking out that companionship and that intimacy. Now, there are always exceptions. We have men who are different, right? We're not talking about that right now. Talking about the way the standard man is created or put together, is that his highest, one of his greatest pursuits is for that type of intimacy or comfort or companionship that lies with a woman. You can tell me if you agree with me or not. I'm speaking, as I said, I'm reading the words with my experience in mind, with my understanding in mind. And what the Quran is stating is that the highest the most sought after experience for a man has to be accompanied by some charge. It has to come at a cost. What is the highest sought after commodity of a woman? What is that, do you think? It is, I believe, in my experience also, it is security and comfort and appreciation. It is to be secure and to be appreciated and to be valued by somebody else, by a man. And so the Quran links the two. It creates a dovetail, a solid bond that relates or that uses or that is based on the two strongest attraction or forces active within a man and a woman. So for you to gain the benefit of love, of intimacy, sex, comfort in the presence and of a woman who will create that comfort, that happiness, that home, for you to have access to that, the cost is your toil and your sweat to create security. And it comes in the form of, as the verse says here, a bridal dowry. The financial cost that comes with marrying and with gaining intimacy with a woman. Now, the bridal dowry is never really stipulated in terms of a cash amount or in terms of a particular percentage. As the Quran said, sadaqatihinna, the amount is really an investment that you make into your woman, into the woman that will share your life with you. There is an investment, sadaqat. In other places I've translated that, to an investment. What is the investment that you will make into that woman? A financial, a monetary investment, but it could also be a material investment. And what the Quran says here is hand over, make that investment in the woman. It could be a very material investment. It could take the form of cash. Today Muslims, under misguidance of their leadership, have reduced this what we call the sadaq or the dowry to a symbolic, artificial amount, and people would pay. Myself, my bridal dowry I paid was a crazy dowry. It was 50 rand. I subsequently tried to see how we could change things, and because there was no real investment. And the investment, I'm not talking about a voluntary investment, I'm talking about a commitment, a legal commitment to that woman. And so this particular verse speaks about that legal commitment, that investment that should be made. But it also softens the idea by saying, should they willingly give back a portion of it? So should they give you relief on that commitment at any point during the marriage, then accept it with a clear conscience. So there are cases where somebody made a massive commitment, and at halfway through the marriage or after 10 years, he simply runs into trouble. He loses his job, not able to commit, because I've seen bridal dowries that come as a monthly payment. So in other words, I've seen a bridal dowry that was stipulated as a monthly amount of 1,000 or 2,000 rand, escalating by 5% or 1%. So what this verse says is that love can trump the agreement or the contract. It's not a contract that is sacred. It is or cast in concrete forever and ever and a day. Should there be a mutual agreement to ease up on this investment, then it is fine. That's what this verse says. But This verse says a lot, as I showed you now. It speaks about that investment, but it also says that investment is subject to being waived, or there can be a waiver on the side of the wife, not on the side of the man. You can't waiver it. Let us quickly go to the next verse. This verse speaks about people who are mentally unsound. وَلَا تُؤْتُوا السُّفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَكُمْ الَّتِي جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ قِيَامًا. Right. This is a verse still in the same theme, women, children. This verse relates to children or people, grown-ups, that are owners or possessors of a substantial portfolio, wealth portfolio. It could be investment, shares, cash, money in the bank, gold, scarce commodities, minerals, whatever. Do not hand over property in your possession to the mentally unsound when it has been placed under your curatorship. Do, however, sustain them from it and keep them well dressed, all this while maintaining healthy communication with them. There was a news article a few months ago, I'm going to relate it to that. Have you heard of Britney Spears? Where Britney Spears was found to be unwell or incapable of managing her own wealth, and her father was placed as a curator or as a manager of her wealth and of all her property. And the Quran basically echoes that position, that the mentally unsound. I've got much more realistic and practical applications of this verse. For example, drug addiction. I have seen the problem of where children who should inherit from their parents are unfortunately hooked on some very serious drugs, which could be meth, or could be opioids, or it could be any other, drug, alcoholism, where they are seriously addicted, where it actually affects their functioning, their lives, and they are unable to make sound decisions because they are mentally hooked. And it's a form of mental collapse. If people are unable to control, if they are acting in a destructive way where they're causing their own death gradually with this drug use, then they fall part of this ayah. They are what we call a sufaha, those who are not right, who are not thinking clearly, who are going to do stupid things with the money. So the verse says those people's funds should be managed by a curator, and they should be well dressed, well provided for in terms of food and sustenance and accommodation, etc. And they should be treated with respect and with kindness. So there should be help forthcoming, counseling, support to them. That's this verse. Right, now we are back to the defenseless children, the orphans now, who are under your care. So somebody, you, for whatever reason, as an uncle, as a grandfather, as an interested person, have taken responsibility for the wealth of a child or more than one child. The Quran's ruling on this is continue to monitor the defenseless children, al-yatama, defenseless children, under your care until they reach the age of marriage. Right? That's the first part. So you have no further hold on their wealth, on their property, when they've reached marriage age. Now, what is marriage age? Then, when you discern maturity, so marriage age comes with the idea of maturity. Then, when they are mature, so in other words, the idea of maturity and marriage are coupled. So, away with those idiots who say that child marriages are legitimate. No, this verse links marriage with maturity. Right? Maturity, the ability to make healthy short-term and long-term decisions and choices. A child cannot make long-term choices. A child, if you give them a bowl of candy, they will finish the bowl. they've got no notion of repercussions or ramifications. So the verse here connects the idea of marriage with maturity. When you discern maturity in them, return their property to them. Do not consume their wealth with extravagance and in haste before they are grown. Those who can afford should preferably claim no expense, and the needy should minimize their drawings on the funds of these children. When you eventually hand over their property to them, then do so in the presence of witnesses. Remember that Allah is fully capable of keeping account. My dear friends, what a beautiful verse. It sets out the end. It brings a conclusion to your control over people's property, over the defenseless or the orphans' property. So it sets an end date to it. So when you discern maturity, in other words, the verse actually says you should constantly test them to see whether they are mature. So in other words, the way they make decisions, the way they function, and when they reach the point where they are mature, able to make sound and healthy choices and decisions, then you have no further hold on their wealth. That's what this verse says. Makes it very clear. To the grown males is due a portion of what their parents and close relatives left behind, as is due to the grown females. This is so whether the inheritance is small or big, the apportioning is incumbent. Right. Let me tell you a story quickly. My grandfather died a wealthy man. My grandfather, in the year around about 19, could be in the 1930s, when his children were very young, when my father was a little boy of 5 years old, I believe. My father became an orphan, fatherless, and my grandfather was a fairly wealthy man. We know that because the stories that my father told was that their pocket money used to be quite substantial in the mornings, and they used to be driven around with a coach, rider, or somebody who would ride the coach, and they would sit in the back of a coach, and the black coach. And so I do deduce from that he was quite wealthy. The unfortunate thing is that my father and his family were, although there was a substantial estate due to them, they somehow never really gained from that estate. They gained, but there was substantial deductions and property that was removed before they could benefit from it. And the women and the men equally, because they were sisters and brothers. And that is, something that's very close to me, because it is a clear piece of our family's history, that where they were orphans and they were really not given what was due to them. And that is corroborated by several people who lived at the time. Should other close relatives or defenseless children or poor ones appear at the time of apportionment, so the verse is now looking at the orphan and at the division of their parents' estate or the father's estate, and it sketches a scenario where if the estate is now divided, and should other close relatives or defenseless children or poor ones appear at the time of apportionment, then see to their basic needs from the funds while maintaining healthy communication with them. So nobody that is a family member of the deceased should be shunned or, chased off. And that is just what this verse is saying. The custodians, this is just a word of caution and advice to the person who is the executor of the will, who is in charge of these children. The custodians should feel the same concern they would feel had they been the ones to leave behind vulnerable family members. Let them keep Allah in mind and speak fairly. And then a very powerful word of warning, a serious word of caution for anyone that even thinks about abusing the wealth of those defenseless children and women. For certain, those who unjustly consume the wealth of the defenseless, all they do is partake in placing fire in their own bellies, and they will one day experience the blaze. I'm not going to go into this verse. This verse speaks about the actual percentage allocation to children. Right. Now, this is also the contentious verse that allocates to the girls half of what is allocated to the boys. You can read it if you want to pause the video. I'm not going to read it all the way now. But what this verse what you must keep in mind when you read this verse is that this verse relates to a verse in the second chapter of the Quran. It speaks about the wasiyah. Now, what is the wasiyah? You see, the Quran in chapter 2 speaks about the wasiyah. And the wasiyah is the primary testament. Now, the Muslim scholars and the tafsir books and so on, they've made the wasiyah 1/3. But there is no such a thing in the Quran as 1/3. The Quran only speaks about the primary wasiyah, and it speaks about the secondary apportionment. The primary wasiyah, the primary testament of a man or a woman, has got no boundaries except that it should be the division of the estate in the primary allocation should be done with fairness and with justice. That is the only qualification, bil ma'roof. You know, it should be dispersed or should be allocated in fairness and with justice. So whether you want to give your girls double what you give your boys, if you find that your girls, your daughters, are more deserving of double, when you feel they have a greater need than the men, than your sons, you are definitely in the wasiyah. You can do any allocation that you choose. And that is in Surah Baqarah. You can go and look it up, the wasiyah. What this chapter speaks about, Surah Nisa, is about the residual amount. Because everywhere it will state, فَلَهُنَّ ثُلُثَ مَا تَرَكَ أَنْ كَانَتْ وَاحِدَةً فَلَهُنَّ نَصِيبٌ. Right, it says so in the next verse. What it says here, when it speaks about this apportioning, it says that all of this allocation is only applicable on funds that are beyond the wasiyah, the original or the first or primary testament. Your primary will and testament, you are open to disperse and to allocate as you see fit. And you will look at your children and you'll look at the beneficiaries that you want to allocate to, and you are perfectly entitled to allocate in a way that you choose. Right, that is the primary wasiyah spoken of in the second chapter. This particular allocation is the residual allocation. So it is the allocation beyond what is in your primary testament. And if we read here that the girls or the women get half of the men, it is simply because the Quran is moving from the assumption that the boys will also be responsible for the girls. It moves from that assumption that the boys will provide accommodation, basic necessities to the women. And that is the only reason this particular one is allocated more slanted towards the males. But remember, if a man's estate is $10 million, if a man's estate is worth $10 million all in all, his primary allocation would allocate to his daughters and to his sons in whatever proportion he chooses. Keep that in mind. So let's say the date of his death, he died, he eventually passed away. So the wealth of $10 million has increased now to $11 million due to, whatever investments, and a big fund like that is usually accrues sort of profits and investment benefits. If it's in the stock market, it would have increased, might have decreased. But this particular verse envisages an increase in the original allocation. So if there was $1 million, it is now 11. If there was $10 million, it's now 11 million. It only speaks about that 1 million. And it actually gives a formula. The boys, the sons, double what the daughters get. And you can argue with me there. Look, this is the creator of the universe. I submit to his wisdom, and the wisdom, you see, it says there, this is the ordainment, the last two lines. Look at the last two lines. If you want to argue, this is the ordainment from Allah, for certainly Allah possesses knowledge and wisdom. So the idea that the creator here has is that there is a slant towards the male offspring, or the male children, because they would be held responsible. And that's going to come out now, right? It's going to come out now. Just look at the next verse. And what I'm telling you is not what I'm dreaming up. Right? This continues. It's still a continuation of the allocation. Just note here very nicely that if they have children, look at the third line there. Look at the third line. The third line makes it very clear that after their primary testament and their debts are settled, min ba'di wasiyatin yusina biha aw dayn. So these stipulations, these allocations are only after the primary testament has been settled and any debts which the deceased has incurred. We do not abandon our debts at the point of death. Such then are the parameters set out by Allah. Those who obey Allah and His Messenger, He will admit to flowing gardens below which streams run, abiding therein. That then will be the ultimate achievement. So it links practice here on earth with a perpetual, or with a immortal afterlife sense of achievement. And then also disobedience is linked to an afterlife sense of failure and penalty. For those who disobey Allah and His Messenger and ignore His parameters, He will admit to the fire, abiding therein and suffering a humiliating penalty. So once again, remember the Quran envisages a transcendent existence for humanity. We are offered an understanding of a transcendent existence. So we don't have just this life. So if you steal from the orphan and you're a Western citizen, an atheist Western citizen, there's no justice for the child and there is no justice for you. You will escape justice, and the child will lose will receive an injustice that will never be compensated for. The reality which the Quran sketches is that actions we take in this world have a bearing on our existence in our next existence, which is in the world hereafter. And just as some scientists postulate the multiverse and parallel universes and fly off on a tangent with those crazy ideas, the Quran gives the idea of a universe beyond this universe, where something of you will continue to exist. There is an element of you that will regenerate, recreate, and with all memories and with all information intact. So in other words, that identity that you possess in this earth, that same identity will be recreated, and it will be rewarded or penalized in terms of its earthly actions. Moving on, the topic changes now slightly, still with the theme of women. Should any of your women practice sexual promiscuity, to which 4 of you can bear testimony, then should such testimony indeed be received, place them under house arrest for as long as they live, until Allah returns them to the right path. My friends, what this verse is highlighting, and as I said to you, the Quran doesn't speak about the aspects of human life that are smooth and, regular, the regular mundane aspects. It doesn't really dwell on that. It dwells on the issues, on the problem areas. So it makes sense of when there's a problem. And this particular verse speaks about women involved in pornography, prostitution, any other form of sexual promiscuity. In particular here, I would assume the worst here and say that this is sexual promiscuity. It is to sell their bodies for money or just to fornicate with multiple partners. Should any of your women become sexually promiscuous, in other words, sleep with many men during the same period of time, and if 4 of those men can actually testify to it, so in other words, it makes the test quite stringent. If 4 men come forward and said, I slept with her, I slept with her, I also slept with her, and I also slept with her. We weren't married, it was at the same time. If that is the case, and unfortunately it does bring up the idea of men being, those who kiss and tell, who actually sleep and then come and betray the girl that they got, pleasure from. It does state that if 4 men can come and testify that they slept with this woman, وَاللَّاتِي يَأْتِينَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مِن نِسَائِكُمْ فَاسْتَشْهِدُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةً مِنْكُمْ. So if 4 of the men can bear testimony and are witness that they've actually been sexually promiscuous, that they've slept with us, she slept with me, she slept with me, 4 men come forward, then there's a punishment here. أَرْبَعَةً فَإِنْ شَهِدُوا, and if they are prepared to put that witness testimony on record, then they should be placed فَامْسِكُوهُنَّ فِي بُيُوتِ حَتَّى يَتَوَفَّاهُنَّ الْمَوْتُ أَوْ يَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ لَهُنَّ سَبِيلًا. Then they should be placed under house arrest. They should be removed from society. Not placed in prison, not beaten, not killed, not whatever. The word here is they should be placed under house arrest. They should be removed from society where their practice will cause the problem. Now, why is this here? Because you know what? This is one of the main underlying causes of single parentage, of yatim, of yatama, of children who are unfatherless. One of the main causal factors behind that is promiscuity, sexual promiscuity, or prostitution, or whatever other reason. In my own society, I have girls in my environment as young as 14, 15, 16, that have 1 child, 2 child, 3 children. It's a massive problem. When you go to the poverty-stricken areas, these are the children that are driving poverty, that are the victims of poverty. These illegitimate children born out of desperation, and we're not judging these women. I don't want to sit here and judge these women. There are various reasons. Women swap material and security for sexual, for sex, right? And in these poorer areas that I'm aware of, many of these young women who are pregnant, they have craved security, they have craved acceptance, they have craved minor material enticements, and they've offered their bodies, they've offered sex in return for that. I'm not judging them. It's a society that where there is that need of women, there is young men who are sexually, craving also, and unfortunately the Quran puts a stop on that. It wants to change that. It wants to end that poverty, that social degradation that comes with casual and illicit promiscuous sex. And it does so by removing those women from society and placing them under house arrest. But not forever, because the word, أَوْ يَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ لَهُنَّ سَبِيلًا. Now the only way I can understand it, أَوْ يَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ لَهُنَّ سَبِيلًا, or until Allah creates a way for them, the only way I can understand that is أَوْ يَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ لَهُنَّ سَبِيلًا, when Allah lays out a path for them, where they tread a different path. Allah returns them to the right path. They abandon that promiscuous practice. Right, now what about the men? As for when two of your men engage, now here the idea is broader than just promiscuity. It is actually promiscuity in a broader sense, but I think from the reading of the verse, وَالَّذَانِ يَأْتِيَانِهَا مِنْكُمْ. So if two men come with a fahisha, with a sexual infraction or an immoral act sexually, which I can only interpret as homosexual promiscuity, sanction both of them. Should they repent, however, then lift the sanction and absolve them both, for Allah is forgiving and kind. No more to say there, but the idea of sex between males in this verse is rejected. Sodomy, whatever intercourse is rejected here, and it is regarded as another act of sexual promiscuity, and those who are found to have been engaging in it should be sanctioned. Doesn't state what sanction, it just says فَأَزُوهُمَا, just sanction them, scold them, reprimand them, whatever the sanction is. So I think the point here of what the Quran really is saying is that homosexuality cannot be normalized. It cannot be regarded as another form of sexual enjoyment. The Quran declares it as no, it is not a legitimate form of sexual expression. Simple as that. Sexual expression can happen in a few legitimate forms. Sexual expression can happen between a man and a woman who are married. Sexual expression can happen for a person on their own, because there's no prevention or curtailing or banning of self-pleasuring. And I'm going to be blatant here because we're all trying to learn here. The idea of self-pleasuring is never outlawed in the Quran, although the Quran always speaks about, do not test the boundaries, do not go beyond what is reasonable and rational. And so any practice taken to its extreme or done in excess is regarded as a flaw and as a failing. And so those who are involved in homosexual promiscuity doesn't fall in the acceptable categories, and therefore it is regarded as outlawed. Certainly Allah must accept the repentance of those who sin out of ignorance, then make amends soon afterwards. And so Allah indeed does pardon them, for Allah possesses knowledge and wisdom. On the other hand, those who commit sins and do so till they face death, then say, I now ask for forgiveness. Or even worse, those who die in a state of denial, to such were fixed an awful penalty. we're moving, the verses will move on now to to the relationship, right? To the male-female relationship in the marriage. Note this, you who made the affirmation, and I've translated Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu to those words. I think it just reads for me better. I know in the ancient or the Yusuf Ali translations, it speaks about, oh, you who believe. We don't use that language. So I don't want to use language that we don't speak like that. But we do get often, I mean, you will hear somebody says, listen, note this, listen to this, note this. So I've translated, note this, you who made the affirmation, alladhina amanu, made the affirmation, who accepted the Quran, who accepted the message. Right? The Quran is, the book is speaking to you and me now who have endorsed and embraced this book. You have no right. La yahillu lakum. It is not allowed. You have no right to subject women to a loathsome relationship. Karhan. Neither do you have the right to trap them with you as a means of extorting some of the dowry you gave them, unless they were proven to have been promiscuous. Rather, live with them in a decent way. Should you dislike something in them, do realize that you may dislike an attribute through which Allah will bring great good to you. Now, this is an extremely divine, powerful, deep verse again. It says there that you don't have any right, or you can't justify it in any way to keep a woman in a loathsome, in a terrible, nasty marriage. You cannot keep a woman like that. And some of you will try and do it because you've paid a dowry, you've committed to a house, let's say, for example, and so, you know what, you're not going to lose a house, so she's going to suffer with you until she walks away without the house. You cannot play around with the investment or the promise, the dowry that you have promised to them. And also, live with them in a decent way. فَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Now, it's setting the scene for the next verse, because what the Quran is saying here is that عَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Live with them in a decent way. A decent way doesn't mean swearing, beating, or throwing stuff around, or losing your temper at every, at every second occasion or opportunity, or at any small provocation. You have to live with them in a decent way. And then it actually states something. There should be, even a good psychiatrist or marriage counselor might not have mentioned this, but might not have thought about this. But what it says here is that there are things that irritate you in your woman, and vice versa. There are things that irritate you in your man. Maybe the way that they are thrifty, or the way that they try and use the last bit of everything. But it is possible that you may dislike an attribute, it says here, the last line, through which Allah will bring great good to you because of her thriftiness. Is the reason why you are so financially successful. Is the reason why you have accomplished so much in your business. Is because she seems to be quite stingy or thrifty, or a hoarder or whatever. So what the book is saying here is that, I'm just taking an example here of thriftiness, right? But the book is stating that there is an attribute that the next person has that could be complementary or augmentary to your character. And because it is different from you, you dislike it. But it is actually something that enriches the relationship. Now, I know between me and my wife has an attention to detail, which I don't have. But it creates an amazing complementary relationship between us, because I have more of a big picture, I'm a big picture person, and she's more of an attention to detail. And many years that we've spent in business together, I was grateful that wherever she was in my business, she could attend to the detail, and she could see when something was missing, and I would not ever noticed something like that. So I can relate. I can relate to that verse. You know, I hope you can too. Let's move on. Should you? All right. Unfortunately, again, the Quran deals with a tough topic, and that's what the Quran is there for, to give guidance with the tough topics, not with the easy stuff. Should you wish to take another wife in place of one wife, one to whom you have paid a fortune in dowry, do not take back of it even a single cent. Will you then prefer to commit slander and sin openly? So yes, you fell out of love, you want to end the relationship, you've fallen in love with somebody new. It's not unheard of. It happens. Quran is not speaking about the alien species, it's speaking about you and me. You want to end the marriage. The Quran says, leave the investment, leave the value, leave the money, leave the commitment that you've made to the first wife. She's given you a lot. Listen to this next one. Look at the next one. Because this really says it. How dare you take it back when you have already enjoyed mutual intimacy? She's already opened up to you. She's given of her most precious part or aspects or quality to you. She's shared it with you. Now you want to be stingy and take back the house and take back the car and take back this and that. Please, how dare you take it back? The Quran says, وَكَيْفَ تَأْخُذُونَهُ وَقَدْ أَفْضَى بَعْضُكُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ. When you've already shared intimacy, now you want to come and take back what you've given. She can't take back what she's given you. She can never be a virgin again. She can never be a young woman again. You've used up her youth. At least leave her with that material comfort and security. Right? Do not marry women to whom you're... Right, so we're going to come to a few verses now here that will lead us to the idea of the concubines, you know, this contentious idea of the concubines. So let me just give you a forewarning of that. And particularly here, what we're going to deal with are categories of women that are not allowed in marriage. And so, of course, the Quran should put it on record. I mean, incest has become an issue now in the West. It's become acceptable in some societies. It was acceptable in ancient Rome, and it might become acceptable again now in the West, because there's this, you know, I've heard on more than one occasion prominent priests, atheist priests, I can't get to the name now, defend the idea of incest. There's a debate between Hamza Tzortzis and some American atheist, and in that debate, you can find a debate, he actually defends the idea of incest. The Quran places it on record that incest is definitely not allowed. There's no legitimacy in incestuous marriages and sex, and it speaks about it. Do not marry, but it starts out with first eliminating your stepmother as a candidate for marriage. Do not marry women to whom your fathers were married, except that which is done. This is a shameful and abominable practice, a pathway to problems. Let's quickly look at this one. And then it goes on to identify other problem areas. Forbidden for you in marriage to you are your mothers, daughters, sisters, aunts, nieces, foster mothers, a whole range of things. And you can really go to the verse and try and get the details there. Right, now we come to a very, very difficult verse. I'm going to stand still here. You see, I have Yusuf Ali's translation of this verse. Let me show you Yusuf Ali's translation of this verse. This is Yusuf Ali's translation of this verse. Look at it. also prohibited are women already married. وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. So the Arabic is وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ, the muhsanat. And Yusuf Ali translates that as women already married. Muhsanat. That's the word, the Arabic word. Muhsanat minan nisa. So Yusuf Ali's translation says, prohibited for you are women already married. But in the very next verse, look at what the word muhsanat appears again. And then it says, وَمَا لَيَسْتَطِيعُ مِنْكُمْ طَوْلًا أَنْ يَنْكِحُوا الْمُحْصَنَاتِ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. And then it says again the same word muhsanat. In the first verse it said, prohibited for marriage are the muhsanat, the women who are already married. In the very next verse it says, you can marry the muhsanat of the mu'minat. I find this was a tough problem for me because I could not get through this. I spent a week because I cannot believe that muhsanat, the same words, same spelling, could be declared illegitimate in the first verse. You cannot marry muhsanat, and in the next verse you can marry muhsanat. And the translator is using, in the first case the word muhsanat is married woman, and in the second case it just means free believing woman. So he changes the translation. This is Yusuf Ali, and I've checked 10 other translations, they all do the same. And I'm stuck. I don't know what to do because it's the same word, two meanings. And why would Allah say, why would the Creator say in the first verse, verse 24, you are not allowed to marry the muhsanat, and in the next verse, you are allowed to marry the muhsanat? I had to make sense of this, and I was stuck, and I couldn't get through to the barrier. Because it says, and I know the Arabic, and it's muhsanat, it says it, and I couldn't get through. And then, you know, sometimes you have to expect a miracle. You have to wait for a miracle to happen. I was just driving on the road with my son, and I got a message. Let me tell you this. I got a message from an established, reputable, learned man who's much more part of the mainstream scholars, right? But somebody that I'm familiar with. Let's call it a friend or an acquaintance, a friend, past friend. Somebody who watches the videos, these videos, and this good acquaintance or friend who is also a scholar, an established scholar, learned man in his own right, perhaps even more definitely more traditionally schooled than I am. This good man, a message pops up on my phone while I'm driving, and the message says, look, I like the stuff that you've covered on your channel, and let me just add I'm not able or willing, or not dealing with these issues. I'm dealing with some other topics with people in terms of my scholarship. But look at this video, look at this channel, and he refers me to a video. And I look at the video, and when I got home later on that day at night, I go and check out this video that he sent me. It's a YouTube video, and it's actually the research of a Syrian scholar that has also done a similar approach to the Quran. You know, a fresh reading of the Quran. And this is a Syrian scholar. So in other words, an Arab. And I'll get to how the connection is with this. Now, this is completely random. This is unplanned. This is completely unplanned. Do you know what verse the scholar is explaining? Or what chapter the scholar is explaining? This is completely random, right? I get this verse from the scholar, and it actually speaks about this idea, the women, this chapter. And what he highlights is let me show you what he highlights is that the problem is not in the muhsanat. It actually lies with the word nisa. Wal muhsanat, read, those of you who can read, wal muhsanat minan nisa, the top line. The muhsanat from the ranks of women. The muhsanat from the ranks of women. And what the scholar is explaining is that nisa, the word that you see there, nisa, appears with a hamza. There's a little letter there called a hamza. And that hamza does not appear in the original copies of the Quran. You see, the Quran is 100% intact. There's no issues with the Quran. The only haraf, the only change that scholars have made to the Holy Quran, and this might come as a surprise to you, is they've added the diacritical marks, the little stripes. They've added the dots, which is called the manqit and the tashkil, the tanqit and the tashkil. But the third change in the text of the Quran is the hamza. They've added something like 1,000 hamzas in the Quran. And this scholar explains that this hamza that they've added is to improve the pronunciation of non-Arabs, because, like, you know, the hamza sound is not in the original Arabic alphabet. They use an alif, but the alif could sometimes end on a long R or on a suddenly ending R, like R, you know. So this scholar, referred to me by this good friend who is a scholar also, the Syrian scholar who says that these hamzas, you must be careful, sometimes these hamzas can alter the meaning. And when it alters the meaning, it will take you away from the understanding. So let's read this again. Wal muhsanat minan nisa. With the hamza behind the word nisa, it is women. Take the hamza away, however, and you sit with wal muhsanat minan nasa. Now it's a different word. Nasa is no longer nisa in this particular sense. It's no longer nisa. It could be nisa in other verses, but in this verse, maybe the word is not nisa. Maybe it is nasa. And I'm still telling you, this is random. This guy, this friend of mine, or this acquaintance sent me this link. As I said, a miracle must happen sometimes. And it's in the form of a pure coincidence. I go back and I look at the ancient manuscripts for myself, because I wanted to see that this is the case in ancient manuscripts, and I took out these ancient manuscripts. Let me show you some of them. Here's an ancient manuscript, and I'm going to show you now there where the red line is. It says minan nisa or minan nasa. There's no dots, there's no diacritical marks, so you have to have a bit of skill to look at this. The red circle that I've circled there says minan nasa. Do you see hamza there? No hamza behind the nasa. Right? It's only nasa. Let's look at another one. Now this particular manuscript dates back to 30 years after the Prophet ﷺ. Here's another one. Minan nasa. That same verse, it actually speaks about nasa without the hamza. Now, what am I trying to say here? You see, I'm not trying to say, oops, it's the wrong slide. What I'm trying to say here is that for that particular verse to make any sense, it has to be read as nasa and not nisa. It has to be read now in this case. And remember, we are all trying to understand the Holy Text. When you look up the word nasa in a dictionary, it stipulates it is something forgotten. Nasa means something forgotten, something abandoned. But at another place also, it will stipulate it is a fugitive, it is an absconder, it is a runaway. So from Nisa to Nasa means the word women doesn't mean, the word Nasa is not now referring to women in this case, but to those who are fugitives. And when I did my translation, this is what I did. Look at this now. So too in the case of enfranchised, muhsanat, I'm translating as an enfranchised woman. And that is really, the word muhsan comes from the word hisn. Ha, sot, nun. It means a fortified person, somebody that is safe and fortified. It means somebody that is protected by the law, that enjoys full protection of the law, that is fully enfranchised, that to whom all laws and all rights are due. That is a hisn, a muhsan, a muhsanat. It is somebody to whom all rights within the law are due to, an enfranchised woman. So that is the idea of a hisn, a person that is fortified and protected by the law. So too in the case of enfranchised women who are fugitives, now no longer enfranchised women who are women, because if you read it or muhsanat min an-nisa, you must say enfranchised women who are women. It would be tautology, it would be a surplus, it would be meaningless to add the word min an-nisa there. So in this sense, the word nasa would make more sense. So too in the case of enfranchised women who are fugitives, unless assigned to your stewardship. So the word here, the word here, nasa, would make more sense. And so I read this verse as not women who are married, but enfranchised muhsanat, women who are fugitives. And if you go back into the history of the time when this chapter was revealed, there was a problem with Meccan women absconding to Medina. So prominent chieftains of Mecca, their women or their daughters would abscond to Medina, to the Prophet. And the verse came to say that these women who are fugitives are not to be married. We know now for a fact that there was also the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which is established within historical texts, that the treaty took place. It's even recorded in the Quran. And the treaty was entailed the sending back of any fugitives. So fugitives from Mecca who come to Medina, the treaty allowed or prescribed that those people who are fugitives from Mecca to Medina should be returned to Mecca. So the verse makes perfect sense, is that these fugitives cannot be married because they need to be returned. And so I put that meaning there, although, Allah knows the meaning of the Quran best. We are all making the effort, and it is up to Allah He has the final say. We're creating meaning that makes sense. It simply doesn't make sense for me to say in one verse, you cannot marry muhsanat, then in the next verse, you can marry muhsanat. The qualification of the muhsanat, or the free and enfranchised women, in the first verse that is prohibited, are those who are fugitives. Right. Moving on. Assigned to your stewardship. Assigned to your stewardship. Illa ma malakat aymanukum. We come now to a difficult topic again, and that is the milk al-yamin. Ma malakat aymanukum, that which your right hand has acquired, which your right hand has committed you to. Ma malakat aymanukum, that which you've acquired or taken into your domain, which you have dominion over. by treaty, by agreement, by contract, whatever. Does the Quran promote sexual or sex slaves or concubines? That's the big question. Because it's a touchy thing, it's a controversial thing. Can we live with the idea of a sex slave? What do we do with this verse? How do we understand this? Because I've translated it as إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. So those fugitives, unless they are captives, and the traditional understanding of ma malakat aymanukum, or what your right hand has acquired or committed you to or taken into your domain, is that these are women that were on the battlefield, women who came during a war or during an active battle that fought on the opposite side and that fell into enemy hands. So in other words, they were arrested as prisoners of war. They are now in the hands of the Muslims, of those who are fighting against the enemy. So the traditional understanding is that these women off the battlefield who become now prisoners, and we know that there were no prisons in ancient times. So the prison, or we can rather state that prisons were privatized to the level of where it was atomized. You know, in America now, you do get prisons, right? You get 1 million people in prison. There's probably 100,000 or 50,000 women, whatever the case may be. The thing is, America has taken it to the next level now, where they've privatized the prisons. So the prisons no longer belong to the state. So the state does not have sole rights of human custody. So human custody is now the province, or it is legitimately placed into the domain of private people. So if I'm a very rich man, Elon Musk, I basically literally can own a prison, and I could have 1,000 women that are prisoners in my prison. If I'm a billionaire, I could contract my prison to government and incarcerate 1,000 women. And technically speaking, the Quran here speaks about the privatizing, but not just the privatizing, the individualizing of prisonership. It's not a weird idea. It's not a weird idea, especially if you look at America now, where prisons are privatized. Would you agree with me that there is a need for prisons, right? We do need to remove certain people from society. People who are dangerous, people who should be, there should be retribution or justice, so they should face justice. Right, so I don't think we agree. We have common cause that prisons are a reality and a fact in the modern world. What this ancient words refer to is where there are no centralized state-owned prisons, where an individual, it's almost like a form of parole system, where a woman could be a parolee under a man. And that is really how your mind should process this. Because if you're simply going to look at it as sex slavery or slavery, you're not doing justice. You're not trying to process the information. You're not being fair and honest. And you are simply being you simply want to have a natural aversion, right? The word here, the idea here, milkul yamin ma malakat aymanukum, I've translated it is unless assigned to your stewardship. If a woman is assigned to your stewardship as a person that has lost all her rights, she's no longer from the muhsanat, she has lost her freedom. As today, female prisoners have lost their freedom. They don't have their regular rights. There is the code of Allah on you, but what I'm introducing here is a way for you to think of this particular category of people, ma malakat aymanukum, people placed under your custody, under your stewardship, under your supervision. That is what this verse really speaks about here. And that is the idea, the concept that is being mooted or being introduced here. So, going back to this verse in its context, it speaks about women who are forbidden for you in marriage. It is fugitive women here, as I've deduced my reading of the verse. Beyond these, you are permitted to use your wealth to pursue the enfranchising and not mere lust. As for the pleasure you derive from them, do spend on them what is stipulated. Should you mutually agree to vary the stipulated expense, then there is no harm. Allah possesses knowledge and wisdom. I just want to deal with that so far. Let's look at the next verse. Okay, now we come to the real issue, the introduction that I've given to you in the previous verse. This is the real smack in the face, difficult one here. Those of you lacking the ability to marry enfranchised women from the ranks of truth affirmers could opt for disenfranchised girls under your stewardship from the ranks of truth affirmers. I'll just stand still here. This is going to be a difficult one. Now let's stand still here and just ponder this verse. Extremely important verse. Those of you lacking the ability to marry enfranchised women, muhsanat min al-mu'minin, could opt for disenfranchised girls. So in other words, girls that have lost their freedom under your stewardship, for whom you are now responsible for, from the ranks of truth affirmers who are mu'min, are Muslims, right? Allah knows your level of commitment. You are also from each other. So it's just quickly setting the record straight that all people are the same. You should not have a prejudice against these women. Marry them, but do gain the permission of their folks first and spend on them dues that are commonly acceptable, as long as they seek enfranchisement, not mere lust, nor secret love affairs. Let me just stop there quickly. This verse is creating a scenario where there is a number of women that have lost their freedom. Now you know what, you here ready to judge me. Let me point you, because there are some of you that are just cocked and ready to judge this verse. You know, David Woods and all these ex-Muslim websites who hate Islam and hate the Quran. You know what? I can show you pictures of women that are in cages in America, in Texas. Innocent women that have only crime is they've crossed the border. They're not murderers. They're not thieves. Their only crime is they've crossed the border with their children in cages. I can show you women in cages in Australia. I can show you women under arrest in France and in Britain. Now you tell me, how do you moralize, how do you give yourself some sort of moral high ground when that is a fact of the world we live in? So there are innocent women. I'm not even talking about those women who are in prison for debt in America, thousands of them, in prison for dacha, in prison for smoking marijuana, in prison for minor crimes, and for, you know, whatever desperate crimes they committed. I'm speaking about women who are in cages in America, in Australia, in Europe, in wherever. All these civilized countries that you anti-Quran, Quran haters love and respect. This verse is bringing, if you want to think of this verse in a modern sense, not in an anachronistic way, then you should read it with those women in mind. Those of you lacking the ability to marry fully free, independent women in your own countries, and we have it here, we have many of those women here, from the ranks of truth, should opt for disenfranchised girls under your stewardship. from the ranks of truth affirmers. If you cannot find a wife from amongst your free, independent women, go to the vulnerable women. Go to the women that you despise, that you don't respect, that have not got all the rights of your free women. And seek their permission for marriage. Go and find partners there. The Quran is offering a pathway to companionship, to intimacy, to sex, to marriage, and is offering these women who you think are despised and not up to your level. Let's read it again. Those of you lacking the ability to marry enfranchised women from the ranks of truth affirmers could offer disenfranchised girls under your stewardship from the ranks of truth affirmers. Allah knows your level of commitment. You are also from each other. You are the same human beings. Marry them, but do gain the permission of their folks first and spend on them dues that are commonly acceptable. So it doesn't mean you have to spend as much as you would have on a free and independent woman, and you are lacking that ability maybe. But do spend on them what is realistic and commonly acceptable, as long as they seek enfranchisement, not mere lust nor secret love affairs. The exception is you should not take women for the sake of mere sex, exploitation. The goal should be to bring these women up to the level of being fully free and independent women. The Quran offers women freedom, independence, financial autonomy in return for the sex and the intimacy that they give. The same idea that's coming out again. The women are the receivers and the recipients and the beneficiaries of security and financial independence, and in return they offer intimacy, sex, and companionship to their men. They offer the qualities of homemakers, of comforters of men, of pleasure creators for men. That is what they offer, and in return they are given emancipation and enfranchisement if they don't have it. What do you think? Makes perfect sense to me, my brothers and sisters. Makes perfect sense to me, unless you hate the Quran and you don't want to see the sense in this. Then if after they newly empowered they commit a sexual offense, then they deserve half the I'm 5 lines up now. Let's just finish this verse. Then if after they are newly empowered, when you've married them, you've gotten the permission of their folks, you've married them. If they then commit a sexual offense, because we do understand that we are dealing with the category of women that are on the margins, on the fringes, that are, I think I will use the word culturized or schooled, that are less schooled or groomed within the culture. If they commit a sexual offense, then they deserve half the punishment due to an enfranchised woman. So because they've newly been enfranchised, they've not been traditionally entitled or enfranchised. There is a leniency from the law on these women, on these wives of yours, that look, they might do something, they might slip up, they will be deserving of half the regular punishment. Now at another place in the Quran, it actually mentions a punishment of 100 lashes for sexual offenses, for adultery, right? For zina. They deserve half of that then as a newly enfranchised person. These directives are of benefit to those of you who want to avoid trouble. Being measured is always in your own interest, and Allah remains forgiving and kind. Let me move on and see how far we can go still. This is quite a long video, but you can watch it in pieces, obviously. It is Allah's intention to clarify things and to guide you using past experiences of those who preceded you, thereby granting you the advantage, because Allah has knowledge and wisdom. Allah's aim is to incline to you, while those who follow their lusts aim to send you off on a tangent. Allah's aim is to ease your burden, because humans are created frail. A verse that comes in here also, I don't quite understand the immediate application, but let's look at it. Note this, you who made the affirmation of truth. Stop abusing your shared wealth. Rather engage in healthy trade that brings mutual benefit to all, and do not commit suicide in a time of hardship, because Allah will surely bring you good fortune. That person that wantonly and unjustly abuses the commonwealth, we will expose to the blazing fire, a thing very easy for us. Should you avoid the serious offences you were cautioned against, we will protect you from your own flaws and make you enter a flourishing state. Do not obsess with what Allah has granted some of you above others. Men get to keep a portion of what they earn. So too do women get a portion of what they earn. So call unto Allah for His goodwill, for Allah possesses knowledge to the finest detail. To all who lost either one of the two parents or a close family member, have we given some benefit from their estate. As for them to whom you have committed your stewardship, give them their share also. Remember, Allah is a witness to it all. Okay, this is the verse that I was waiting for. This is the verse about beating, and this is obviously another controversial one. We've dealt with quite a few controversial ones already, so I think this is the last one. Men must guarantee the well-being of women. Ar-rijal qawwamuna ala An-Nisa. Because Allah gave an advantage to some above others, and since men provide financial support. Remember earlier I said men are given a slightly greater share of the residual division of the estate, the secondary testament. Men are given double. Here it clarifies, because Allah gave them an advantage, and because men provide, because they are supposed to nafaqah, anfaqu, they are supposed to support the women. Therefore, righteous women are those who diligently safeguard in private that which God once safeguarded. Now we come to the difficult one, where the translators have translated this in a very negative way. As to those women from whom you face serious subversion, nushuz, that is how my translation goes. I see the word nushuz as subversion of the marriage, subversion of the home. It can take any form. It can take the form of bringing in people who are other men. It could be developing destructive habits, drug abuse. It could be abuse of the children. It could be neglect of the children. It could be neglect of the home. Any subversive action on the side of a woman. As to those women from whom you face serious subversion. And remember I said the woman is the homemaker. She's the custodian of the home. If they subvert the home, admonish them, forsake them in bed, and verbally slam them. Now I'm going to, this is where the word fadribuhunna, beat them, as Yusuf Ali has translated, as many others have translated. Some people, Muhammad Ali has translated it as castigate them or verbally beat them. Why would you, as Quran haters, always give the Quran or not give the Quran the benefit of the doubt? I've seen news articles where they would say that the Prime Minister of Britain has slammed the President of Russia for the invasion of Ukraine. Let me make an example. The Prime Minister has slammed, or Western leaders have slammed the Russians, have slammed Putin. Why are you allowed to use figurative language? Why are you allowed to use figurative language, but you deny the Quran the right to use figurative language? And the Quran, in fact, states that we have created some verses that are mutashabihat. The figurative language here is that you should beat them verbally. You should slam them verbally. Slam them means to condemn. To beat somebody verbally, to slam them means to castigate them, to condemn them. The same way that your leaders say that we have slammed the Russians, doesn't mean that you've beaten up the Russians. So I want to just clarify here that the word here, the word fadribuhunna, means to castigate, to assault them with words, to scold them, to shout at them, to condemn them. Because if you read that the previous verse, for ashiruhunna bil ma'ruf, the previous verses said, live with them in kindness. Why will the Quran say beat them? And in another section of the Quran it says, separate from them in kindness. So if you can live with them in kindness as one option, and you can separate them from them with kindness or decency is the other option, then there's no option of beating them, which is the hell option. The Quran, in fact, in one verse it says that you should not let a woman live in hell in the marriage. So that's my final verse that I will be covering here today. For you, it's been going on long enough, but I thought I've covered all the contentious ones: the multiple women, the multiple wives, the concubines, which are not really concubines. These are women that have lost their freedom, that have no civil rights, that you are encouraged to marry them and to naturalize them as citizens. Right? Number 3, I've spoken about the will and testament. The men should be getting double, and I've mentioned to you why that happens, because it's a residual testament, not the main testament. And then lastly, I've spoken about the beating here. I think I will finish off there. It's been a very long discussion, but inshallah, I hope you will benefit from it. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.